Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a really interesting webinar coming up. I am so excited about this one, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to watch it again. We'll be sending out an email after today's event that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question, and we'll take as many questions as we can near the end of today's presentation. And we're also going to be doing a drawing for three, count them, three $50 Amazon gift cards, and that drawing is going to be happening near the end of today's presentation. So stick around, hopefully you'll be one of our big three lucky winners. So moving rapidly along, we'll go ahead and dive right on into today's DevOps.com webinar, which is DevOps Tools, CI/CD ARA, Tools Worth Knowing. Oh, and there's one of our panelists. I hope the other ones will join me as well. All right, great. So our speakers today, our panelists today, are, first of all, we have Jeff Keyes, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Plutora. Hi, Jeff. Oh, Jeff, I think you need to get your...
We need to figure out how the mute button works, is what you're saying. Well, good morning. Feels like a Monday.
I know, actually, you're so right. Our second panelist today is Tracy Reagan, who is the CEO of Deploy Hub. Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're here too. And our third panelist, whose screen is blank right now at the moment, is Brian Dawson, who's the DevOps evangelist at CloudBees. Hi, Brian, are you with us? There you are.
Yep. Yes, I am. Hello.
Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm taking the call from a hotel, so I'm bound to their network speeds. But glad to be here. Hello, everybody.
All right. Well, we'll take that into account then. Okay. So thank you all for joining me here today, and just want to let the audience know that today's presentation is going to be it's based in part on this latest eBook that we've just released. It's the State of DevOps Tools book 2019. It's going to be available on DevOps.com, and everybody who attends today's or signed up for today's webinar is also going to be receiving a link in our follow-up email to download it themselves. So hoping to get a whole lot of information out of our panelists today on the topic of CI/CD ARA, because I know it's one that is definitely close to the hearts and minds of a lot of today's audience. Okay, so what I want to do is so first of all, the ebook is kind of a directory. So it's more in kind of an explanation of the tools that are out there. It is by no means an exhaustive directory, but it really just, kind of introduces the topics and some of the more popular tools that are out there. But there's a lot that's happening in the space. And so what I really want to do is kind of focus on CI/CD ARA as kind of a category, if you will, and talk about some of the things that are happening in the space, where we're seeing it, what are some of the considerations, just stuff like that. So if at any time you guys have a question, as I said, you have a question for our panelists, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel. But first, because I said that there's a lot happening in the space now, I think it's all worth discussing, and I know we're not going to get to it all, but I hope we can fit in as much as we can. So what I'd like to start with is kind of just an overview of the market, kind of the state of the market, and just to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit. I know we've had some things happening over the last couple months that are worth mentioning. First of all is the new Continuous Delivery Foundation. Also, Brian, hopefully you can speak to this, the CloudBees acquisition of Electric Cloud. And I'm sure there are other things that are happening also, but let's start out. Tracy, maybe you can start the conversation with this new continuous delivery foundation. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of what that means for the market at large?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the CD Foundation, the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation, what we now call CDF, is underneath the Linux Foundation. So it made sense for to create a platform where we have a lot of open source tools in the CD market, and many of them had their own governing bodies. So it sort of made sense to create a new foundation to bring all of those CD tools under that umbrella with the same governance body. It's important to remember that what CD means. So the continuous delivery is really the ability to have a process that allows you to deliver software on a high frequency basis. It doesn't mean continuous delivery itself doesn't mean continuous integration, which is build. It doesn't mean continuous test, which is testing, and it doesn't mean continuous deployment. And there's a big change coming in the CD pipeline with Kubernetes. So this is a perfect time to begin a conversation about how that process looks, and to bring these tools together and these thought leaders together to start that conversation about how we can better manage plugins to these tools, how we can better manage the life cycle as a whole, as a community, and have that discussion about what that looks like with microservices.
All right, great. I know you guys are going to do a whole lot, and just the inclusion of Kubernetes in the conversation is game changing, I think. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys are able to come up with in that respect. So Brian, let's talk a little bit about CloudBees and the acquisition of Electric Cloud. Can you kind of set the ground work there and tell us what it means to the market in general and what you guys plan to do with that?
Yeah. So first, to tie it a bit back to the conversation around the CDF and the value of CDF, I think like CDF, one of the values that the acquisition of Electric Cloud will bring Electric Cloud customers, CloudBees customers, and the market in general is interoperability. I think one of the powers that you're going to see in CDF is that one of the challenges people face is, okay, there's a number of fantastic best-of-breed solutions out there, open source in the terms of CDF and commercial in the terms of our acquisition. And people really end up spending a lot of time struggling on how to wire these together into a cohesive, sustainable, manageable pipeline. And so what we've seen in the market is that while there is sort of a pure approach to continuous delivery and continuous deployment, which oftentimes people will orchestrate from a tool like Jenkins or CloudBees Core using pipeline script. In reality, organizations have larger organizations and more mature organizations have very varied application portfolios. And a number of those applications in those portfolios have complex, multi-step, and oftentimes highly governed deployments. So we were finding that people were implementing continuous delivery up in Jenkins up to the point where they had a deployable, and then they were sort of dropping it, throwing it over the fence for application release automation and orchestration to take over and drive that complex deployment. By bringing these two companies together, we basically provide organizations of any type and any size to implement CD or continuous delivery and continuous delivery ARA or release automation for any and every application in their portfolio. So I'm really excited about about seeing those come together more. And extending this rich Jenkins ecosystem that CloudBees has tapped into the Electric Cloud ecosystem and enabling our customers.
Great. Well, I know that I'm interested in seeing what the new combined company will be able to do. So I'm sure the audience does as well. Jeff, let's hear a little bit from you. What are some of the kind of barometers that you're seeing impacting the CI/CD ARA kind of marketplace today as we see it?
Well, I absolutely love what's happening in the market because all this is validation that if you're not doing CI and breaking up your monolithic build processes and incorporating automation, incorporating the vast wealth of automated tools that you can run, infinite number of times as much as you have compute power to do so, then you're really missing out. And how that affects how you deliver and build software is game changing. The CDF and the foundation is more validation that all this is absolutely mainstream, and you should definitely be moving this direction. Validation that it's kind of funny when you look at Brian, like you were talking about and I call them unnatural acts that people were doing with Jenkins to get software from, what was built and into deployables to get those out into production, was insanity. And thus, why Deploy Hub and Electric Cloud and release automation is been such a critical part of that to stop people from writing insanity in scripts and then the rest of the orchestration processes that are needed around moving bits around. It's like, wow, it's great. We finally know that all these pieces actually come together and there's a standard template of what you can do without being crazy with bash scripts and the rest of the insanity that things have been going on. Please stop doing that if you're currently doing that. There's a trend here and you'll see all these things come together. I think the other part for me too is as people are moving these things together to try to understand how to interconnect these things with the rest of the monolithic apps in their transformation processes. How do I incorporate and still get governance, compliance, ensure my security? I've still got to transform my organization. I still have to get these processes and this part of this transformation integrated into the rest of my culture, if you will, along the journey of my digital transformation. What's cool for me is all these things are so validating. They're really just exciting because it's a change saying we can actually do this in the largest and most complex companies in the world. No matter how complex, no matter your level of governance, you can actually do this, and you can do this now. And your first steps are what you're hearing here.
Awesome. I don't think I could have said it better myself. So that's I think that's a great introduction to the topic, and I think one of the things, Jeff, you and I we were talking earlier, and one of the things you mentioned was the fact that CI/CD is hard. It's difficult for a lot of people to grasp, and so I think part of that has to do with the fact that maybe there's some confusion in the marketplace as to what it is basically, and so I thought I threw this slide together and I thought, well, maybe we can talk a little bit about what the difference is between CI/CD and application release automation, because I think there's still some confusion out there, and frankly, even I get confused sometimes when I'm thinking about it. And then also, we're talking about ARA and then throwing in this other acronym ARO. So let's first kind of parse out the difference between CI/CD and ARA. So I don't know which of you wants to take that first.
I'll be happy to take that.
Awesome.
I think about that all the time. I read this over and over and over.
Go get them, Tracy.
All right. So let's start at the beginning, and I'll make it as quick as possible. Let's start at CI, continuous integration. Why did we do that? We did that because we had these builds, and what we used to do in the old days would we'd wait for a sync update, which was usually every month, sometimes a little longer, 6 weeks. And some poor soul like myself would be required to get the build to work after everybody checked their code in. And that was done literally once a month generally, and it would take forever. So we got in a habit of saying, you know what, let's do builds on a daily basis. Because it takes too long to do it otherwise. So then you set up a process, and this was done basically in the old days with CVS and at commands to go check out stuff out of CVS and then run your compile. And then this really cool tool called Hudson came out, and we started using Hudson to do that instead of the at commands. And Hudson was an orchestration tool that allowed you to do a better job of seeing standard logs and standard things about your build. And the goal was to solve the build within 10 minutes. Most companies still can't do that. So then we come up with continuous delivery. So continuous integration is really continuous build. Continuous delivery is simply saying once something in dev is completed, then start a workflow and test. And once that's completed, start a workflow in prod. And as Brian pointed out, much of the problems with the CD pipeline today is that we still have a waterfall approach, right? We're still talking dev, test, prod. And we're trying to get things done faster and more frequent. And production teams don't have the kind of, they can't sustain a higher cadence, a more frequent cadence. They're adjusted to doing releases once a quarter, not once a day. So this is continuous delivery. So application release automation, the intent is for the release process to be as frequent as the continuous delivery pipeline pushes it. And when you have scripts, what would happen on the deploy side, you have scripts written in the dev environment so that the dev workflow calls a script to run things in a development environment. And then you tweak those scripts to make it work for test. And then you have to tweak them again to work for prod. Application release automation is the process of having a standard release process from dev, test, and prod. You don't do something different for all, one script for dev, one script for test, and then the production team uses Chef. That's basically what was happening. So
Still
application
happening.
release, yeah, it's still happening. And in some cases, they got smart and said we're going to use Chef for dev, test, and prod. But the point is that the CI/CD has nothing to do with actually doing the deployments, which was where the rub came. That's where the friction started. And ARA tools came out to fix that particular problem set so that a release, the pipeline could push something from dev to test to prod on a high frequency basis with all the logging and all the visibility needed. So I hope that clarifies it.
And and I would add, and especially having spent with the acquisition, I think an immense amount of time over the last month looking at and trying to message the space, and it gets kind of fuzzy. Is that what had kind of happened in a lot of organizations is in pursuit of DevOps and CD, operation teams went out and sought full automation of the deployment process using ARA, application release automation, or application release orchestration solutions, while dev teams continued to further sort of automate everything up to and sometimes through test using a lot of the other tools that we're talking about here. And unfortunately, in pursuit of modernization, we ended up with a lot of organizations kind of further calcifying the line between the two. I think Tracy, instead of fully adopting the stance that you put forward, that application release automation should also in and of itself be about automating and orchestrating from dev, test, and on through to production, right? So I think one of the things that we still have some work to do as a market in terms of defining these terms, which is why it's a great question, is we have to get them to be treated holistically and sort of one and the same.
I couldn't agree more. There needs to be a continuous pipeline. So as we compete these kinds of concepts together, another aspect that becomes painfully clear, I didn't really understand. I didn't internalize, even though I knew what was going on as much, until we had a prospect who told me, yeah, we've been doing DevOps for about 18 months, but we still haven't shipped anything. And I'll tell you, my mind just couldn't wrap around that. It's like, I don't get it. But he was from a fairly large pharmaceutical company, and the level of governance and tax and the processes that they have in place in order to implement their pipelines are enormous. Regulatory compliance, if they don't comply, it's not just people lose their jobs, it's like criminal liability kind of things. And so they cannot take that lightly. And those processes are not really automated, and they're not really implemented in they're trying to figure out how to do that. And so there's a whole bunch of transformation, not just in the software delivery process, but how do they incorporate that into the culture, into the processes, and then bring that back into the tooling so they can make it all happen. So what's the difference between CI/CD and ARA in my mind is exactly what's been said. It's, and maybe to take that from a different perspective, as you're transforming your pipeline, and you're taking the monolith and you start breaking that down, and you start building and verifying and incorporating that and getting these builds and starting to farm your acceptance builds and getting that test included, you still have to finish of getting those packages out and also get all the rest of the approvals and everything else that's needed so you can get those bits into each environment. And so that when a test environment is and you're still in sort of that waterfall kind of model because you got everything built and now it's into a test environment, that they can still approve that, and that's okay. That's where you're currently at. And when you do better and you can get more of an automated pipeline, you get these processes and so forth further adopted into the automation, great, that's okay too, but you need a way to get there. And the answer are some of these of appending ARA and ARO into your CI/CD process so you can go that full mile. And that's the point.
So let me chat a little bit too about some of the difficulties. Why haven't we seen this? We've been doing CD for a while. Why are we not seeing it our deployments be incorporated? So we have a bit of I always like to call it dysfunction in our family. We have the CI/CD family, right? And they're usually developers. Developers are the ones who adopt CI. They build out the workflows and they do the best that they can with the tools at hand. And if you notice, most of them will build out their CI/CD process with open source because they're not going to go out and do a proof of concept for a CI server. I mean, how many times did that happen with Jenkins? Probably not often. Developers downloaded it and started building out their CI, their continuous integration process. Then we start talking about continuous delivery, and developers were like, yeah, we should be able to do that. We want to push that. Well, then came ARA tools. And who did they sell to? They don't sell to developers. They sell over to, they sell at the CIO office, and it's a big, heavy sell. It's a multi-year license agreement. It's a $250,000 deal, and that's kind of an entry-level deal. How many application teams have the budget to do that? And it's also a change in the configuration of all the production servers. So when they go to do that, they say, well, we have to get all teams to agree to do ARA. All the teams have to agree to use one tool because the whole production environment needs to be able to support it. Well, the production environment's already decided on theirs. They've been using Puppet and Chef for a while to do their DevOps. So they want to use that. So there's a bit of dysfunction because what really needs to happen is these ARA tools have to be marketed and sold at a less expensive in a less expensive model in order for developers to get their hands on it. And it has to be frictionless in the production environment in order for production teams to agree to adopt it. So we still have waterfall culture that we're trying to apply CI/CD and this fast release automation, and it doesn't always work. So we still have a lot to work on, and we still have a lot to fix in terms of how the culture accepts it and how these tools are sold.
Makes sense. So then real quickly, what is the difference between ARA and ARO? Jeff?
I think we have you on mute, Jeff. We see you talking, but can't hear you.
Jeez, man. I'm trying to nipple behind here, so I'm muting myself. I think that's kind of the point of where this comes in. If you're 100% and you've got everything automated from your culture and you've got all the approvals and the governance all automated, you can get there with CI/CD ARA. The problem is that there's this logic that happens where you have to start incorporating, what if there's a few approvals? What if there's a few processes that need to ensure governance and checks? What if I need to orchestrate across people and automated processes? Now what do I do? Crap, I'm not 100% there of getting all the way from my automated builds and my packages and getting those deployed out. What's next? And that's really the realm of where ARO comes in. It's an orchestration engine that's workflow. I can draw my logic. I can say, here's the different steps. It incorporates people. It incorporates logic. It incorporates automated tasks. It incorporates integrations to other systems. It incorporates, pulling integrations in from other systems and unifying that data. That is where ARO has its sweet spot. It's a flow-based, here's the process that happens to make the next steps that can include auditable steps so that you can come back after the fact and show your governance team, hey, look, we actually did the right process and we got the approvals. I can prove it, and I can prove it right here. That's the point, and that's where it comes in. So ARA does the fantastic job of moving the bits and moving the the logic of moving things along. But you need ARO if you're not all automated. If you're if you need that workflow that's going to take you through that next step.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and move on since we're blowing through this hour so far. Let's talk a little bit about. So this is something that comes up a lot in the conversation, and obviously open source is being embraced a lot more these days than it used to be. But there's still kind of this push and pull between open source and proprietary, and really which one is better, and what are if I use open source, am I putting my entire system at risk? And all these questions that come up. So I thought maybe we could kind of just maybe dispel some of the myths around open source versus proprietary. And what I want to do basically is open the floor to you guys to talk about maybe some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks. What are some of the considerations that when folks are making the decision? So. Brian, why don't we start with you if you kind of give us your opinion on, the topic itself.
Well, so yeah, this is, this is particularly, I think, near and dear to me, having worked at commercial companies. So, the audience may not know, I also worked for the company that had created Subversion, which now seems like an antiquated tool with Git in place, right? But is one better than the other? No, right? They both are better at certain things and better at certain times in the maturation of an organization in adoption of modern software development best practices. I actually have often said that open source, not only kind of the open source mindset of collaboration and experimentation, but the existence of key open source tools focused on continuous integration, continuous delivery, and now with Deploy Hub, application release automation, have been critical in enabling the experimentation and grassroots adoption that has brought the continuous delivery and DevOps market to where it was today. I think as Tracy was noting earlier, look, developers are focused on moving fast, right? They don't necessarily, in pursuit of better practices, have the time and I think more importantly, the patience to go through traditional heavyweight corporate and enterprise procurement processes. So having something that is free, low risk, and has a rich community support, such as open source and such as Jenkins, enables developers to get tools in, try them out, test them, and prove things out before they have to go sell management on making a commitment, which at the end of the day slows things down. And really, that's how Jenkins has become, for a number of years now, the most popular continuous integration and for some people, continuous delivery solution out there. As Tracy said, look, people would go in and they'd download a war and they'd drop a war on their desktop first, or now more importantly, they'll go to Amazon Marketplace, right, and instantiate, or a cloud marketplace and instantiate a Jenkins server. That's enabled them to kind of bring these new modern practices in through the back door and prove them. Now, just real quick before I hand it off to the rest of the group. Now, at some point, what we see is developers prove, Jenkins, for instance, works, Git works, your open source tooling in a given category, and then they start to attract more people to it. Adoption increases, and at some point that becomes part of your business critical delivery path. And every organization either needs to offload the developers and the development team from having to admin and maintain those tools, and or they need some assurance, some coverage that they have somebody to go to get the support when they run into a problem, or get the support when they have an issue with the tool. Because now that it's more widely adopted, you can't afford for your Jenkins server to go down, using Jenkins as an example, for a day while you try to figure out what's wrong. That's actually impacting your business.
Right.
So I'll add to some of that. So open source has been obviously pretty critical. I was on the Eclipse Foundation when it first started, and really understanding the problems around open source has to do with, first of all, governance. What if you use an open source tool that the main contributor decides they don't want to support anymore? And these foundations are fixing some of that, which is pretty critical. But the biggest problem with open source is, how does a company monetize around it in order to keep it up and alive? So open source isn't free. Open source costs money. For example, how the foundations are created, companies like CloudBees and like Deploy Hub, we join it and we pay money to keep that governance alive for those open source tools. But the companies who are contributing have to still have a way to make money. And is open source the way to monetize on it? Just support, maybe. But I think that, I guess what I'm saying is, for those of you out there who are users, consider joining some of these foundations. If you're a big user of Jenkins, then you should want to join as a customer the CDF, because it will it sustains that open source code base for the long run. And that, I think, is the biggest concern about open source, is how long will it live out there? How does it have people continuing to contribute around it and monitor the contributions? There's a lot of governance that goes on with open source and making sure it stays clean, and people are doing code reviews. There's a lot of work behind it. So if you're a customer and you're using CI/CD and you're a Jenkins user, go out and consider becoming a customer member of the CDF, and help keep that product moving forward. Or any of the products. We got Tecton in there, and the CDF will start bringing more of those open source tools into their governance model, and that's why it's critical.
Good points.
I kind of feel like the odd man out here, since of this group, we're the only one that does not have an open source model. And there's a reason for it too. We're sort of the management layer on top. I know in the last year's DevOps.com tools guide, we had ourselves listed as the only vendor in a category called continuous delivery management. Now that category is expanded out, called value stream management in the upcoming tools guide, and of which there's a number of vendors, as there's been a lot of market movement that's happened there. As a top-down vendor, to try to give visibility and management into the different tool chains and what they're happening, to try to make the work that's going on in individual teams visible without them having to do anything, it's a different story. And what we find is our customers are actually more interested in having a single throat to grab and really to tailor that solution to make sure it works with everything. I don't care what these individual teams are doing, give me visibility, because I don't want to have to change anything. And so we'll never be open source that way. It doesn't make sense, because that's, we're looking for a different model. We're looking to be the management layer, and are for many customers.
So with that though, are you finding any integration issues? Are there certain things that maybe folks really need to be aware of or consider when they are looking at using an open source tool versus a proprietary one? I mean, what are some of the things you're seeing?
What we see is, frankly, in the dev tool chains, everybody, for the most part, anything that's a dev tool that has had any significant adoption has done a fantastic job of providing integration layers. It has an API, it's got multiple methods of integration and different ways to connect it up, if you will. There's such a push now of connecting from the ideation, the dev work, the testing, release, and on into production, that you just can't get by without some kind of interconnecting these tools. What we like out of that is it gives Plutora and our story a fantastic opportunity to pull all that stuff into a common data model, to unify the work and actually get visibility in what's happening, regardless of whatever the level of DevOps maturity, Agile maturity, whatever the level of CI/CD people are at, and it sort of unifies them all into that single model. It helps with integrating these tools that we can actually send the data two-way. Some of the legacy system, when I think one of the toughest ones we integrate with is HPLM. from a work model of trying to get that in, and what a disaster that is of trying to integrate that into what's happening with the builds and so forth. But it works. We can still get it and make it happen.
All right, great. I'm taking a look at the time. We are already 25 minutes to the top of the hour. So I'm going to move us along because obviously we are, whoops, no, we did that one. Hold on. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. Okay, so CI, CD, ARA, and containers. You know, Tracy, when you were talking about this continuous delivery foundation and the work you guys are doing, you know, it kind of piqued my interest because containers are becoming a much larger part of the conversation these days. And obviously with that, there are going to be certain considerations that, you know, in the way that the CI/CD toolchain might be impacted, just, you know, things that are, you know, just going to impact things. So for lack of a better word. So, you know, how does it change though? So we're talking about Kubernetes, we're talking about microservices, you know, containers. What changes with those?
Yeah, so what you're really talking about is, I think that Jeff brought it up, or it might have been Brian, but it's moving from a monolithic style to a decomposed monolithic, where you have many, you know, we think functions in terms of a monolithic binary. So right now with continuous integration and continuous delivery, the problem kind of starts all the way back at the CI process, because when we do a compile and we rebuild our application, we recompile everything and we re-release everything. Now, if it's just a WAR file or a single jar file, it's not a big deal. But if you have a little bit bigger of an application, you have multiple jars that have interdependencies, you have database updates, this becomes more of a problem, because even in that model, you have individual pieces. In the Kubernetes model, you're going to have a lot more individual pieces. It's not about containers, because right now you can take the monolithic and deploy it, do a Docker run command and deploy that into your cluster. Not a big deal. The big deal becomes when you really start doing container microservice management. That is where things start getting crazy. So you're going to have conversations like, does every single microservice have its own repository, and it has its own workflow, and then it has its own independent, it deploys independently, which is kind of a definition of microservices, that it should be independently deployable. But that independently deployable object is going to have relationships with an application. How do you track the monolithic equivalent? We talk a lot about that around Deploy Hub. How do you share those microservices? Again, it's a primary function we're looking at with Deploy Hub, is providing the sharing capability, because it's kind of like having a music service. You know, you have no way of searching on an artist or an album name. You just have a microservice out in a cluster and you have no idea where it's at or who wrote it and how to use it. So the CI/CD pipeline has to start changing, has to start thinking about how to aggregate the monolithic equivalent to represent what we're actually writing. We have a teller application for a bank. Now it's broken up into 200 microservices. What version of the application is actually an end user using? So that's one area that's going to change. And I believe that we're going to see as Kubernetes and service mesh begins to mature, we're going to see some differences in how we actually route users. So right now, for example, Google, if you think about Google Docs, when they put a new feature out, they will route it to a percentage of their users to do kind of a smoke test. I believe that kind of model is going to become more and more popular with microservices and Kubernetes. So ARA tools are going to have to adjust for that as well. So service mesh potentially has the ability to obliterate the waterfall, because instead of having a dev test prod and cluster, you can have your deployment solution can say, I need to tell service mesh to route this new version of a single microservice, which creates a new version of an application, to a group of developers. And then if that's clean, we're going to reroute it to a group of testers. And then if that's clean, we're going to reroute it to a group of production users, which means that you only have one environment. You no longer have this dev test prod waterfall kind of approach. Now, that kind of is probably mind-blowing for most people on the call, but it's something that we should be thinking about because Kubernetes has the ability to do that, and so does microservices. And in essence, that's really what we're talking about. You're taking incremental changes and you want to test that incremental change. Well, in an incremental world, do you really need to re-release everything or manage dev, test, and prod environments? So it's going to change the way the CI/CD pipeline looks and works, and it's going to change how ARA works.
Just to add on to that, that decomposition and deconstructing of these big monolithic applications is going to have an enormous impact on the organizations as well, especially as we get into these big organizations that haven't figured out how to transform themselves from governance and compliance and the rest of those kinds of things to incorporate that into the process. If they have a certain amount of, for lack of a better word, tax for every single thing they deploy into production, they have to find an automated way of doing that. Otherwise, they're never going to get there. Otherwise, they're just going to end up creating instances of this stuff and running it through the same old waterfall process. Well, we did much of microservices. Great. Well, now let's hand that to test. We're never going to get to there unless we find a way to incorporate these things. I think the piece that I would throw in here is that's why you have to start looking at going down this path of release orchestration in addition to your CI/CD processes. And you can use there's not that many release orchestration engines out there on the market, but we're here as well, and we connect with Deploy Hub. We can connect with Electric Cloud. There's lots of cool things to be done there, but you've got to get down this path because I think dev will move faster in transforming into microservices than organizations are ready for. And so you've got to move these in parallel. Otherwise, you've done a lot of great things for automating your build and getting into a test environment, and that's about it.
All right, great. Brian, any thoughts there? Oh, you're on mute, Brian.
Oh, there we go. So I'll just add quick. I think Jeff hit on a couple of things that are, well, actually both Tracy and Jeff hit on a couple of important things that I'll just emphasize. I think, one is a key thing with containers is that they support immutability, build once, test multiple times, so to say. But with containers and then decomposing into microservices, it really enables teams to move at the speed that CI and CD dictate, right? So we can get shorter feedback loops, identify value faster. What I want to call out that Jeff brought up is actually not tools related. And this is to say that we do end up moving into a space with microservices where a fewer group of people should and can own a particular area of functionality. And so along with microservices goes kind of restructuring of your teams around this concept of speed and collaboration. Now, to what Tracy said, just to kind of set for a spike for Jeff is, well, yes, now we got more, now we have, instead of one application to track and manage, we have 10, 20, 50 services managed by 10, 20 teams. This is where value stream management solutions like DevOps and Plutora are important because they allow you to kind of manage the end-to-end flow of these individual services as co-related entities that provide an end service to a customer.
All right, great. I want to skip ahead because we're starting to run out of time, guys. So I went ahead and put this slide up. And we should just make these like 90-minute webinars because I think we'll be able to finally get through everything that we want to. But I put this diagram up on the deck, and this is a real DevOps tool chain from a real customer, and we kind of prettied it up a little bit, but I wanted to put this up because we're talking about the DevOps tool chain and CI/CD. There's so much more that's happening beyond CI/CD, so I want to kind of delve into that just to kind of tie everything together. And so, what are I know, everybody's got something to say. I actually don't even want to like throw a question out at you guys because I know everybody's got something that they want to say about that. So Brian, I'm going to let you go, and then Jeff, and then Tracy, right, and then hopefully we'll be able to kind of wrap it up at that point.
So beyond CI/CD, I think I went this land smack dab into what we've been talking a lot about at our Cloud Bees days, a road tour that we're going around and doing, training people on Jenkins and looking forward to the future, as well as what I'm hearing from Forrester and Gartner. And you know, really at the end of the day, we pursued CI/CD so we could shift stuff faster, more reliably, and more repeatably, so we can recognize this thing called value, right? And we've been using this term so we can ship stuff, or S, that matters, right? It's one thing just to ship. Let's ship stuff that matters and makes an impact. So what Cloud Bees, Gartner, Forrester, and I'm hearing generally in the market are saying about what goes beyond CI/CD is this idea of kind of continuous everything, or what we're calling software development management. This idea that software is now a key differentiating business function that needs to live as a first-class citizen within the business, connected to the business. So what I love about this slide is that the workflow that's described doesn't start with a commit. It doesn't even just start with a JIRA issue. It starts with Salesforce, right? And this idea that we're capturing support issues, customer interviews, problem statements, things that we're trying to solve, and we're sending that through our pipeline, turning it into a user story, turning it into a set of tasks that will be implemented, recognized as a service. And so beyond CI/CD, we're expanding further to the left into the business. We're expanding further to the right into the actual run and operation of the solution, so that we're consistently getting feedback, not only through the development process, but as it operates and through customer interactions, and we're feeding that back into the pipeline. So the software development organization and the business are working together in a continuous manner to deliver more value, to deliver better software.
Well stated. Maybe I'll just start by saying it's kind of funny as we've come at this. Of course, we come at this from a very technical perspective, but just to ask an interesting question, I recently was chatting with my boss talking about if you had the opportunity to invest into, you know, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or Domino's Pizza 10 years ago into their stock, which one would have yielded the most results for you? And interestingly enough, the answer is Domino's Pizza. They've gone through an enormous digital transformation and how they allow for ordering and so forth. The point is, software is eating the world, and we've been promoting this message for, gosh, I've been with Patora now for you know, almost 2 years, and that's been the story. Is if you don't realize that your company is in the business of being a software company, you're not getting it, and that's what you have to promote. And that isn't just about what can you write and code. It's about delivering value to your customers, and that value will be delivered in the form of different software solutions that help you promote your different services that add on to it. Love how you put that, Brian. It doesn't start at, you know, great. It's wonderful to be able to tell how many check-ins a day did you do, how many deployments did you go. But frankly, it's an interesting analytic, it's an interesting data point, but probably has about as much to do with delivering value to customers as how many key presses the developers are doing per day. Really, you have to look at value flowing through the entire chain. Interesting parts about this, though, is as you get more autonomous, as you get more self-led, self-directed teams, and these things get integrated in, you now are faced with a different problem. How do I manage the forest from the trees? How do I actually see what's happening in the individual pipelines? How do I enable them to see what's going on between each other? This is our story. This is what value stream management is. If you haven't gone through that, take a look at the value stream management wave by Forrester. It is really good going through all that. There's great research there, but being able to see things from ideation all the way through, coordinating the delivery, and still being able to incorporate all the governance, security, compliance, things that are needed in the pipelines as you continue to transform. Remember, we never arrive from a digital transformation. We're always improving, and that's the point.
And then I'll just finish off saying, I'll summarize what the guys said. We're really looking at I'll use 2 words: breaking down silos and collaboration. That's really what's beyond CI/CD. The idea of CI and CD is really is pretty still siloed. We have different repositories with separate workflows. We have dev, test, and prod environments. But as we move down this road, those silos will start breaking down because we'll need to create a more collaborative framework in order for developers to start sharing pieces and parts of these applications that should talk to each other. And the CI/CD process will have to adopt for that.
Yeah, and there's so much more that we could be talking about in this presentation, and unfortunately we are running up against a time limit, but issues such as regulatory compliance and full automation versus, kind of manual parts of the process still being manual, approvals, things like that. It's so much more we could be talking about. So
we will.
We'll do it another time, I guess. So I am going to, at this point, just throw this slide up, looking ahead, next evolution, next generation. What final thoughts? What do you guys see for the future for this space?
Machine learning. So commoditization of some of the sort of base tools and pipelines, unification around more of a standard pipeline description, observability so that we are getting richer and deeper feedback to better inform us, and then the application of machine learning and predictive analytics so that as we're continuously working and generating this data and feedback, there's some intelligent analysis being applied to that and then served to us.
I agree with that completely. I think from a business perspective, I think the days of this is the new technology, this is the new methodology, this is the new way of doing things, and just trust me, I'll get it done that way. I think those days are done. I think the expectation from the business to IT is you must be aligned. You're the core part of the product. That means the focus is going to be so centrally poised on IT teams to make sure they're, one, aligned with the business, and two, have complete transparency. It needs to be done in a way that's completely automated. We have to deliver value in whatever way we can. And we have to have a system in place that enables that visibility, which will incorporate the collaboration and communication between teams.
So that leaves it with me. I just have to say Kubernetes, 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 Kubernetes. I mean, that really is the next evolution, right?
Right.
Most of the tools we have today work in in environments that are fairly physical server-like. Even cloud images, you spin up a full cloud image and it's kind of just a virtual server. Kubernetes is very different from that. As soon as you move away from putting your application in a container and treating a container like a server. So once we start actually implementing Kubernetes in the way it was intended to be implemented, there's going to be quite a bit of new tooling around the space. I suspect we'll see some more M&As coming up down the road in the current existing tool sets. And there will be a discussion about automation versus having a declarative sort of a process where everything is in a YAML script. And I believe that while we might start in this declarative mode with managing that Kubernetes environment, that we will run into some roadblocks because it'll just be too much information. And automation then will eventually win out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Well, I am going to give us a few minutes here for questions because I don't want to leave anybody out here. So let's see how many questions we can get to here. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, here's a good one. In the single environment service mesh world, how would you defend against data corruption during testing and development?
In that single environment service mesh world, we haven't figured that one out yet. The bigger problem, I think, is even how to deprecate a microservice that might need to be deprecated as soon as possible. So when you're starting to work in that single environment service mesh world, we need to really beef up the service mesh in order to start having better integrations to LDAP, for example. So you have some strength at that level. So we haven't sorted it out yet, but it will come. It'll get there. I mean, we've just seen quite a bit of funding put into Istio, and as well as Linkerd. They both got funded literally within days of one another. So there's a race going on, and these kinds of topics will be part of that feature set that service mesh creates. Now, you may have in your single environment, I'm glad you asked this question because it's really, it needs discussion. In that single environment, service mesh environment, you may have ways that you need to update a database, but the database needs to connect to a test database or a dev database, not the prod database. So configuration management begins to become a bigger part of the story. Mm-hmm. And understanding how to manage a cluster that has a new version of a microservice that's connected to a test or a dev version of a database, and how do you update just that when it's ready to move out. So configuration management is going to be more of an issue, and the security question is going to be built in more into the service mesh. But we haven't sorted it out yet.
All right. You guys have anything to add to that?
I think that's spot on, which is those processes are, I think that world is still maturing.
Yeah.
It's great.
Okay, all right, so let's try and get to one more question before we have to close it out. Does the panel have experience or advice dealing with a change approval board that uses a stick to stop deliveries for absence of process adherence, and then they dislike automation and want manual approvals and the like?
Every freaking day. That's all I have to say. Every freaking day. My advice is embrace that completely. Don't even try to fight it, just completely embrace it. That is the point of application release orchestration. And you integrate application release automation to move the bits, and you automate where you can. And that's okay. I mean, Deploy Hub's an awesome solution. Start getting that all in place and use Platora, or Electric Cloud with the orchestration side. And the whole point is that you can give them the thing they're looking for, which is that button to push to say, it's not done till I said it's done. And then your next step in that process is to say, well, what is it that you're really looking for? What are the steps? Because I want to make sure that before it comes to you, we've actually done that. And you'll take those things and you'll incorporate that in the release orchestration, and you have all these different steps. And what will happen is that by the time it comes to them for the push the button, they're like, has all this been done? And you say, well, go look at it. It's right there. Oh yeah. Okay, now they just have to push the button. And then what happens, you say, well, we're not going to allow anything to go because we're going to make a templatized release that is of these steps. And nothing will go forward, and you can just watch it and see it happen. And we'll make sure it happens. And it's happening via automation. You're slowly taking them through that process of automation without them really knowing. So embrace it, because that's your process of getting there, with the implication that they will be more effective by incorporating those gates and checks in the release orchestration engine than by doing it manually. And then the next thing you can do is take it up a level. Look at the entirety of your value stream. Look at the metrics of what it takes from ideation to production. And when you do that, you're going to see certain points that have massive inefficiencies. Why the freak are we spending weeks in this stage waiting for these people? And you can be like, hey, I can't get their stuff of what they need so I can incorporate it into the governance of this thing. So the whole point of this is they'll then be forced to, like, okay, well, let's rework our process, because we will all want to deliver faster, including the change advisory boards. Trust me, they all do. But they also have to protect the viability of production. So with that in mind, your answer is, talk to us. That's what we do every freaking day.
I think that's the best description of what ARO is. So if you have that question, what you have is a problem with visibility. And when you base everything off of scripts and you just have workflows that are pushing scripts across, and you don't have visibility, you don't have good reporting, you're not using something like a Platora or a DevOps, it's a big red flag for people on the production side and audit side, and they're going to stop it. So you have to be concerned about what their needs are. And we used to do something called a compliance scorecard, which is basically policies to define what's a healthy and a successful deployment. And basically ARO is automating that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any thoughts, Brian, before we close it out?
Just remember, be pragmatic, not dogmatic. It takes time. You're better off if you take time to prove value, to gain buy-in, and don't make it about, hey, we want to automate for the sake of automating. We want to implement CI/CD. It's, hey, organization, hey, change review board. There are some pains that you experience. Let's figure out how to solve those. And by the way, it happens to be with tools that provide a level of automation and visibility.
All right. All right, great. Well, at that point, on that, I'm going to have to close it out now because we're 1 minute to the top of the hour. Real quick, want to do the Amazon gift card drawing. So without further ado, our winners today are Mahesh Rajani. Congratulations, Mahesh. Troy Jin. Congratulations, Troy. And D Tran. Congratulations, D. Thank you. Thanks for being on the webinar today to be a gift card winner. I want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, because such a great conversation, you will have the opportunity to do so. We're going to be sending out an email that contains both a link to today's webinar as well as a link to download the ebook. So you'll be able to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go there, check it out. Just go to webinars/on-demand, and hopefully it'll be there waiting for you. And while you're there, please take a look around at all the other webinars that we have both upcoming and on demand. Tracy, Jeff, and Brian, thank you all so much for such a great presentation. I had such fun on this webinar. I hope you guys did, and I hope the audience got a lot out of it too.
It's great.
Let's do this again.
Co-panelist.
Yeah, let's do it again. Thanks, Jeff.
All right,
Thanks, Tracy.
all right,
Thanks,
guys.
Charlie. Everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everybody, and thanks to the audience for attending today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.